The dining room glowed with warm light, but the atmosphere felt colder than glass. Leela sat quietly at the edge of the table, hands folded, eyes flicking toward her husband, Derek. Their friends leaned in, sipping wine, trading stories of business ventures and bold risks. When the conversation paused, Leela's voice, gentle, almost hesitant, broke the silence. "I've been thinking maybe I could start a small design studio, something simple from home." For a heartbeat, the table stilled. Then Derek laughed, sharp and booming. "Leela running a business? She can't even balance our grocery list." His words sliced the air. The guests chuckled nervously, shifting in their seats. The narrator's voice lingers. "Some wounds don't bleed. They bruise the spirit in front of watching eyes." And as Leela lowered her gaze, her silence screamed louder than Derek's laughter. The laughter faded, but inside Leela it echoed endlessly. Each chuckle from around that table replayed like a cruel chorus in her mind. She sat there, lips pressed together, hands folded too tightly in her lap, a smile fixed on her face that didn't belong to her. On the outside, she was composed, a picture of patience. On the inside, she was unraveling. The narrator whispers, "There are wounds invisible to the eye. They bleed not on skin, but on dignity." The dinner dragged on. Forks scraped against plates, glasses clinked, and Derek's voice filled the air with stories about his successes. He relished every chance to shine. Every so often, he would pat Leela's hand or brush her arm, the gesture outwardly affectionate, but to her it felt like ownership, a reminder that even her place at the table was by his allowance. She spoke no more that night. Later, when guests had gone and the house fell into quiet, she stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates. Warm water ran over her trembling hands. Derek was in the living room, humming as he scrolled through his phone. Not once did he notice her silence. Her mind replayed the scene. Her voice small but hopeful. His laugh sharp like glass breaking. The guests' uneasy smiles, choosing complicity over kindness. Each replay dug deeper. She carried the dishes upstairs, not because they belonged there, but because she needed to move, needed something to do with her hands. When she reached their bedroom, she set the plates on the dresser absent-mindedly. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. A woman stared back, polished, well-dressed, but fading. Her lips parted as though to speak, to argue, to demand dignity. But only a whisper came out. "Maybe he's right." And just like that, the shame settled heavier. The narrator breathes over her shoulder. Cruelty is not only in words spoken, but in words stolen. Every time she swallowed her voice, she swallowed pieces of herself. Leela sat at the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the embroidered quilt. It had been a gift from her mother long before she married Derek. Back then, she had dreams stitched inside her too, of starting a studio, designing, creating. Back then, she had believed her ideas mattered. Now, every time she tried to speak, Derek's laughter was waiting like a shadow. She thought of the faces around the table, their polite grins, their awkward shifting, their refusal to defend her. That silence hurt almost as much as Derek's words. It was as if the room had agreed with him. She wasn't capable. She wasn't enough. Her throat tightened, tears brimmed, but she forced them back. Crying would give his words power. Crying would make it real. Instead, she folded inward, hiding the storm where no one could see. The hours passed, but sleep refused her. Beside her, Derek snored, unbothered, victorious in his casual cruelty. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. It was in that silence she heard herself clearest. She heard the girl she once was, the one who used to sketch by candlelight, who filled notebooks with designs, who whispered dreams to her twin sister, Amara, of the company they'd build one day. That voice was faint now, buried under years of mockery, but it wasn't gone. It begged, "Remember me." But memory, too, was a wound. It reminded her of what she had lost. So Leela turned on her side, pulled the blanket tight, and shut her eyes. Silence, they say, is golden, but for her, silence was lead, heavy, suffocating, pulling her down inch by inch. And in the stillness of that night, she did not rage, she did not cry. She simply endured. That was her quiet rebellion, not to give him her tears, not yet. Leela drifted finally into restless sleep. But even in dreams, she was quiet. Even in dreams, she was small. The world had not yet seen the fire waiting beneath her silence. The door shut with a heavy click, muffling the outside world. No more polite laughter, no more clinking glasses, just the silence of their house and Derek's voice cutting through it like a blade. "Embarrassed me tonight," he muttered, tossing his jacket over the chair. "Always trying to say something out of your depth." Leela paused in the hallway, her hands clutching the strap of her purse. She didn't move, didn't breathe, as though stillness could make her invisible. But Derek wasn't done. He never was. In the kitchen, he poured himself a drink, ice cracking under the weight of amber liquid. His voice grew louder with each sip. "You don't get it, do you? I'm the one people respect. I'm the one they listen to, not you. You're nothing without me, Leela, nothing." The words struck harder because they weren't new. They were rehearsed, practiced, perfected. Leela stepped quietly into the living room, but the walls had no mercy. His voice followed, wrapping around her, cornering her. She tried to speak, her throat aching. "Derek, I wasn't." He cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Don't start. Every time you try to sound smart, you prove you're not. Just leave the business talk to people who actually matter." Her shoulders sagged. Words shrank back into her chest. The narrator breathes. Cruelty wears many masks. The public one polished with charm, the private one sharpened with contempt. Tonight, she saw both. Derek collapsed into his leather armchair, drink in hand. He gestured lazily toward her. "You're lucky, you know. Most women would kill for this life, this house, this comfort. All you had to do was marry me. And you think you can talk about running a business?" The disdain in his voice wasn't anger, it was conviction. He believed it. Leela moved to the staircase, her hand on the banister. She wanted to disappear upstairs, bury herself beneath the quilt again. But something inside her, faint, flickering, made her turn back. "I only shared an idea," she said softly. It wasn't your place." His voice cracked like a whip. The glass in his hand trembled, ice clinking. "God, Leela, do you ever think before you speak? I carry us, I make the money, you just sit here and exist." Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes shimmered. The narrator lingers. Her silence wasn't agreement, it was survival. Because sometimes words are fuel to fire, and tonight she could already smell the smoke. Derek leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Say it, say you'd be nothing without me." Leela froze, her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She wanted to shout, "No, I am more than this. I was more before you," but the weight of his gaze pinned her down. Her voice faltered, breaking like thin glass. "I don't want to fight." "Exactly," he said, leaning back, satisfied. "Because you know I'm right." She turned away quickly before he could see the tear escape. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Behind her, Derek hummed, sipping his drink, a man pleased with his victory. But in her chest, something else stirred. Not victory, not defeat. A simmering ache that felt dangerously close to defiance. Upstairs, she shut the bedroom door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror again. The same polished woman, the same fading eyes. But this time, her whisper was different. "I am not nothing." The words were barely audible, but they were hers. She sat at the desk by the window, pulling open the drawer. Inside, buried beneath old papers, was a leather notebook, worn, frayed at the edges. She hadn't touched it in years. It was filled with sketches, designs, outlines of a dream she once called hers. Her fingers traced the pages, the ink smudged from old nights of scribbling by lamplight. A tear slid down her cheek, not from weakness but from recognition. She remembered who she was. The narrator whispers. He told her she was nothing, but the pages in her hand told her otherwise. Every line drawn, every idea sketched was proof of a woman buried, not erased. Downstairs, Derek laughed at something on his phone, the sound drifting up the staircase. It mingled with the sound of ice in his glass, the sound of arrogance untouched by consequence. But upstairs in the quiet, another sound emerged, the faint scratch of a pen on paper. Leela wrote again, not loudly, not boldly, just quietly in ink that no one could mock out of her hand. Hours later, Derek stumbled upstairs, half drunk, muttering about early meetings. He didn't notice the notebook on the desk, didn't notice her swollen eyes, didn't notice the ember returning to her chest. He only noticed his own reflection in the mirror as he brushed his teeth, adjusting his tie, already rehearsing tomorrow's performance for the world. Behind closed doors, cruelty sharpens itself on silence, but silence can be deceptive. For every insult endured, every dignity denied, something else was being carved within her. Not weakness, not defeat, but the shape of a woman who would one day stand. And as Leela slipped the notebook back into the drawer, she whispered again, firmer this time, "I am not nothinged." The words didn't reach Derek. They weren't meant to. They reached her. Before Derek, before the silence that now swallowed her days, there was another story, one stitched with laughter and fire. Leela had a twin, Amara. They were born minutes apart but lived as though a single spirit had been split into two bodies. As children, they drew sketches on scraps of paper, making pretend contracts with crayons, promising each other. One day, they would build a company together. Amara was the bold one, quick with words, unafraid to stand tall even when challenged. Leela was softer, quieter, but her creativity burned brighter. Together they balanced each other, steel and flame, patience and spark. In their teenage years, they mapped their dreams in notebooks. A design studio, simple at first, but with visions of international clients, storefronts lined with their creations. They dreamed not of wealth, but of freedom, of being seen. But paths can diverge quickly. Amara left first. A scholarship took her to another city. Leela remembered the morning she boarded the train, suitcase clutched tight, eyes shining with ambition. "We'll meet again at the top," Amara had promised, gripping Leela's hands through the open window. Leela stayed. At first, she told herself it was temporary. She worked small jobs, filled the quiet by sketching late into the night. But then came Derek, charming, confident, offering what seemed like security. At 22, when he asked her to marry him, she said yes, believing love could be a foundation for dreams. But dreams don't thrive in cages. With each year, Derek's voice grew louder and her smaller. Slowly, her notebooks closed. The girl who once dreamed of storefronts became the woman hosting dinners, arranging flowers, perfecting silence. Amara's absence grew heavier with time. Calls became fewer, then stopped. Rumors reached her through distant relatives. Amara was thriving, building something big, living the ambition they had once shared. Leela was proud, but the pride was tangled with longing and with shame. She missed her twin like she missed air. Yet she convinced herself, perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps Amara had carried the torch for both of them. The narrator reflects, life does not always break loudly. Sometimes it drifts apart with small choices, one sister stepping forward, the other standing still. And in that space between them, silence took root. Still, in quiet moments when Leela touched her old notebooks, she could almost hear Amara's voice again. Don't shrink. Don't let them tell you who you are. Those words were buried, but not forgotten. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, Amara was not gone. She was waiting. And fate was already writing a path that would bring the sisters back together, not as children dreaming, but as women with fire still in their bones. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, their light scattering across polished marble and crystal glasses. Music swelled softly in the background, but conversation was the true performance of the night. Men in suits exchanging numbers, women in sleek dresses laughing politely at jokes meant to impress. Leela stood beside Derek, her arm looped through his, her smile delicate, rehearsed. She had perfected the art of blending in, not too loud, not too silent, just enough to seem present. Derek, as always, commanded attention. He thrived on it, speaking with that booming voice, the one that filled rooms and demanded nods. Tonight, he was in his element, retelling stories of business conquests, small embellishments transforming into grand victories. The crowd drank it in. Then, as champagne flutes were refreshed and a lull in the conversation arrived, someone turned toward Leela with genuine warmth. "You're quiet tonight, Leela. Do you work in the same field as Derek?" Her heart stumbled, but she gathered a breath. She wanted to answer honestly. She wanted to speak about her ideas, the sketches hidden in her drawer. So she said softly, "I've always dreamed of starting something creative, a small design studio." The air shifted. Before she could continue, Derek's laughter split the moment. Loud, sharp, filling every corner of the room. "Leela, a studio, please. She barely finished college. She couldn't run a lemonade stand without me doing the numbers." The laughter wasn't just his this time. A few guests chuckled, unsure if it was safe to do so, their eyes darting between him and her. Others forced smiles, complicit in silence. No one defended her. Heat flushed Leela's face. Her lips pressed together, the beginnings of a reply trembling there. But Derek's hand, heavy on her shoulder, anchored her down. He leaned in just enough for the crowd to hear, his grin wide, his voice patronizing. "She's sweet, though. That's what matters. Leave the big ideas to the professionals." The room laughed again, softer, safer this time. Inside her chest, something cracked. The narrator's voice lingers. It is not only the insult that wounds, it is the agreement of the room. The way silence becomes applause, the way eyes look away instead of standing up. Leela lowered her gaze to the floor, her body shrinking inward. But behind her eyes, a flicker stirred. A memory, a twin's voice, "Don't shrink." For the first time in years, she did not hear Derek's laugh alone. She heard Amara's echo against it, steady, unyielding. The evening carried on. Derek toasted to his own achievements, the crowd obliging. But Leela remained quiet, her silence no longer empty. Inside, it was shifting, thickening, preparing. The narrator closes softly. Sometimes humiliation is a knife, but sometimes it is also a spark, and sparks, however small, are enough to light a fire waiting for air. She sipped her champagne, eyes downcast. Yet if one looked closely, they would have seen it, the faintest glimmer of something unbroken, waiting. The ballroom glittered under chandeliers, but its beauty was brittle, like glass about to crack. Laughter rose in sharp bursts, punctuated by clinking glasses, as Derek commanded the room. His voice carried with the arrogance of a man convinced the spotlight belonged only to him. Leela stood beside him, a shadow of her former self. The sparkle in her eyes, the one that once lit up corridors and conference rooms, had dulled. She laughed when expected, nodded when prompted, but her movements were mechanical, her joy siphoned by Derek's subtle cruelty. The way he interrupted her mid-sentence, the way his hand pressed firmly against her arm when she dared to hesitate. From the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, a woman watched. She was dressed simply, her attire so plain it blended into the wallpaper of excess. No jewels, no designer fabrics, only soft cotton in muted tones, a scarf tucked modestly at her neck. Her eyes, though, betrayed something far richer, a quiet fire, patient and steady. Amara had returned. No one recognized her. Time had weathered her face with delicate lines, and the world had taught her the art of invisibility. She slipped through the gathering like air, observed but not registered, a ghost amid opulence. Her gaze fixed on Leela, and in that gaze was history. Amara remembered the girl who once spoke with laughter unchained, who dreamed boldly of building not just wealth but bridges of kindness. And now, here stood that same girl, muted, shackled by the gilded hand of Derek Vale. Derek raised a toast, smug and commanding. To loyalty and to vision, to those who stand firm against weakness. His words cut sharp, and a ripple of approval spread through the crowd. But Amara caught the flicker in Leela's eyes, the way her hand trembled ever so slightly against the stem of her glass. The disguised stranger noted every detail. Derek's posture, his smirk, his circle of sycophants nodding on cue. She saw the way he leaned closer to Leela, whispering something that made her shoulders tighten. Each gesture was small, almost invisible to those caught up in the performance of wealth, but Amara's eyes were trained for subtleties. Years had sharpened her perception into a blade. She remained still, letting Derek's arrogance expose itself. The more he basked, the more he revealed. It wasn't yet time to intervene, not yet. Instead, she let the crowd's tide carry her nearer, never breaking the rhythm of anonymity. She slipped between servers balancing silver trays, lingered by marble pillars, her presence no more remarkable than a shadow. But within her chest, her heart thudded with quiet urgency. Tonight was not chance, it was fate's orchestration. The girl she once loved like kin, the girl she had lost to the cruelty of time and power, was now within reach. And so Amara waited, silent in the crowd, letting Derek's cruelty write its own indictment. Leela would not see her yet, not tonight, but the seed of return had been sown. The stranger had stepped back into the story. The conference room had emptied of its louder voices, leaving behind only the murmur of glasses and the fading echo of applause. Derek Vale lingered at the center, like a king surveying his conquered hall. His suit gleamed as sharply as his smile, every detail curated to scream dominance. It was then that Amara approached, still cloaked in her disguise, a modest dress, no ornament, no hint of her true self. She slipped into the circle as if she belonged there. Someone introduced her lightly as the consultant brought in for strategic insights. The label suited her well, a name without a past. Derek's eyes scanned her, calculating. "Ah, the strategist," he said with a smirk. "You've come to see how it's really done, I suppose." Amara inclined her head, her voice calm, even unassuming. "I'm always interested in learning from those who claim mastery." His ego caught the bait instantly. He puffed himself larger, basking in the invisible spotlight. "Claim? No, I don't claim. I demonstrate. Look around you. Every deal, every loyal face here tonight, every hand that shook mine, it's evidence, proof of what I build." As he spoke, his hand rested possessively on Leela's shoulder. She stood beside him, silent, eyes cast downward. When she tried to speak, Derek cut across her sentence with a laugh. "My wife here," he added, squeezing her shoulder a little too firmly. "She means well, but she's a dreamer, and dreams don't close contracts." The words landed like a slap, invisible yet heavy. Leela's smile faltered, the dimming light in her face noticed only by Amara. "Interesting," Amara said softly, her eyes steady. "So you believe loyalty is won by dominance, not respect?" Derek chuckled, dismissive. "Respect is a currency too cheap. People need authority, not kindness. They need to be reminded who leads." She let his words hang, then tilted her head. "And yet authority without trust collapses the moment the room empties. Who follows a man when the lights go out?" For the first time, Derek's smirk flickered. He recovered quickly with a wave of his glass. "You speak like an idealist, but the world belongs to those who take it, not those who ask nicely for permission." "Perhaps," Amara murmured, her tone measured. "But sometimes the strongest builders are invisible until the house stands. And sometimes the loudest voices echo most when the chamber is hollow." Derek laughed again, but this time the sound carried strain. He turned to Leela, almost defensive. "See, even strangers are drawn to challenge me. It proves I am worth the fight." Amara said nothing more, only let her silence press against him. The silence made him restless, searching for validation that did not come. When she excused herself at last, Derek tried to charm her with a parting quip. "I like you, consultant. You've got wit. But wit doesn't build empires, men like me do." She smiled faintly, her eyes unblinking. "Yes," she replied, "but empires often forget who writes their histories." And with that, she left him standing, ego intact on the surface, but the first fracture already spidering beneath. The ballroom had quieted into the hush of late night. Music faded, laughter thinned, and only fragments of glass clinks lingered. Derek, however, had not softened with the evening. On the ride home, his voice sharpened like broken glass. "You embarrassed me," he hissed, though no one was left to hear. "Standing there like a child, letting people think you mattered in the conversation. You should thank me. I spared you deeper humiliation." Leela's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, to throw back words like stones. Instead, silence clung to her, heavy and suffocating. When they arrived, she slipped away, retreating into the nearest washroom. The door clicked shut, her body folding inward. Hands gripped the porcelain sink as tears finally spilled, tears she had held back through every cutting remark, every false smile. Her reflection wavered in the mirror, blurred by salt water. Who have I become? The door creaked open. Soft footsteps entered. A woman's voice, low, steady, almost unfamiliar. "You don't deserve his cruelty." Leela startled, turning sharply. Before her stood the consultant from the evening, yet something in her gaze felt piercing, intimate. I'm fine," Leela stammered, wiping her cheeks too quickly. But the stranger's presence was different. She did not flinch at the mess of tears, did not fill the silence with shallow comfort. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice warm yet unyielding. "Fine," the woman repeated. "Fine is what we say when the fire is already consuming us. Fine is the word that hides the ache." Leela froze. The cadence of that voice, it struck some hidden chord, a memory long locked away. "I used to know someone," Amira whispered, her tones softening. "A girl who once dreamed boldly. She laughed at the idea of being small. She wanted to build, to create, to light up every room. Do you remember her?" Leela's breath caught. The words wrapped around her like a forgotten melody. Images flickered, two girls with matching eyes, sketching designs on scraps of paper, promising each other futures carved by their own hands. Her lips trembled. How do you know about her?" The woman's eyes glistened, but she did not answer directly. Instead, she lifted a hand, brushing Leela's tear-streaked cheek with a gentleness that undid her defenses. "Because that fire," Amira said softly, "isn't gone, it's only hidden, and I came to remind you, some embers never die." Leela stared, shaken to her core. The stranger's touch, her words, her presence, it was as if a ghost from her past had stepped into the present. For the first time in years, something flickered inside her chest. Not rage, not defiance, but strength, quiet, awakening strength. In the mirror, she no longer saw only a broken woman. She saw the shadow of someone she once knew, someone she could be again. And though she did not yet understand, her heart whispered what her mind could not. This woman is no stranger at all. The boardroom gleamed with polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that cast the city in silver light. Derek entered with his usual swagger, confident the meeting would crown his latest triumph. His voice boomed as he spread glossy reports across the table, basking in the nods of shareholders and clients. Then the door opened. A hush fell as a woman strode in, poised, composed, dressed not in muted cotton, but in a tailored suit that seemed to command the air itself. Her presence shifted the atmosphere, pulling every gaze toward her. Amira's. But not the anonymous consultant, not the shadow in the crowd. Here unveiled, she was Amira Vale, CEO of Solera Group, a name that carried weight across markets and boardrooms alike. Gasps rippled through the room, whispers tumbling from one seat to another. Derek's confident grin faltered, his posture stiffening. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm yet edged with authority, "I'm here not just as a partner in this venture, but as a sister." All eyes widened. Leela, seated quietly in the corner, lifted her head in disbelief. Amara's gaze locked on Derek. Her words, precise and deliberate, cut sharper than any outburst. "You mocked my sister, you dismissed her worth. Tonight you will face mine." The silence that followed was thunderous. Derek opened his mouth, but no words came. His arrogance had nowhere to stand. The power dynamic flipped in an instant. The man who had thrived on belittling now stood small, exposed under the weight of truth. And Leela, for the first time in years, felt the room tilt toward her, not in mockery but in respect. The boardroom had shifted into a theater, every face turned toward Amara as if awaiting the next act. Derek, pale and restless, tried to steady his voice. This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and... Amara raised a hand, silencing him without raising her tone. Calm authority draped every word. I don't walk into rooms I don't already belong in. And tonight, Mr. Vale, it's time to address the truth. From her leather portfolio, she drew out a stack of documents. Pages spread like cards across the polished table, numbers, contracts, emails. Each sheet bore evidence of Derek's mismanagement. Inflated expenses, concealed debts, decisions made not for growth but for ego. Gasps rippled again. Whispers filled the room. One shareholder leaned forward, scanning the papers with widening eyes. Amara's voice was steady, surgical. While my firm considered partnership, we discovered patterns, negligence dressed as strategy, arrogance disguised as leadership. What you mocked in others, Derek, you failed to master yourself. Derek's protest withered on his tongue. His jaw clenched, his confidence now brittle glass. Amara turned, her gaze softening as it landed on Leela. For years, he told you that you could not build, that you could not lead. But tonight, the truth is clear. It is not you who lacks vision, it is him. She lifted a final document, sliding it across the table toward Leela. This position, lead strategist in the upcoming venture, was one he insisted you could never handle. I disagree. I believe you were born for it. The room stilled. Every gaze followed the motion, from Amara's hand to Leela's trembling fingers as she touched the paper. Leela's breath caught. The mockery that had once caged her now shattered. She looked at Derek, not with fear, but with quiet steadiness. He sat frozen, speechless, stripped of his armor. In that silence, Amara spoke the final word. Dignity belongs where it is earned, and tonight it belongs to her. For a long, suspended moment, no one spoke. The weight of Amara's words hung over the boardroom like a closing curtain. Papers lay scattered before Derek, each page a silent accusation. His lips parted, searching for words, but none came. Then, softly at first, Leela's voice broke the silence. I used to believe him. Every head turned toward her. She stood slowly, her hands trembling but her back straightening with each breath. Her eyes lingered on Derek, no longer pleading, no longer afraid. I believed I was nothing because you needed me small. Every laugh at my expense, every insult whispered in the dark. You planted them until they grew into chains. Her voice wavered, then steadied. But chains only hold if we keep carrying them. Tonight, I choose to put them down. The room hushed deeper. Even the air seemed to pause. Leela turned to the table, to the men and women who had once chuckled at Derek's mockery. I am not a shadow, I am not weak, and I am not his to belittle. I have my own mind, my own vision, and from this moment forward, my own voice. A ripple of applause began, hesitant, almost reverent. Then it grew, steady and strong, filling the boardroom with a sound Leela had never heard directed at her. Respect. Derek sank lower into his chair, his smirk gone, his authority crumbling into silence. He had no defense, no clever retort. The room that once magnified his arrogance now magnified his defeat. Leela lifted her chin, a quiet strength radiating from her. She did not gloat, did not strike back with venom. Instead, her victory came in calm finality, a woman once silenced now speaking for herself and being heard. Her own voice had returned. The boardroom slowly emptied, leaving only the echo of applause and the faint rustle of papers. Derek remained slumped in his chair, small in the shadow of his own arrogance, but the story no longer belonged to him. The narrator's voice rose, calm and steady, weaving the final thread. One twin carried ambition, the other carried endurance. One forged ahead through the noise of the world, the other endured the silence of a loveless home. Different paths, different burdens, but together they carried fire. Leela stepped toward Amara, her eyes shimmering with recognition and gratitude. The years of separation melted in that single look. No words were needed. Their bond, once frayed, was whole again. Amara reached for her hand, and Leela took it, fingers intertwining like roots finding soil after a long drought. The narrator continued. A woman mocked is not a woman diminished. She is a flame waiting for air. And when air comes, when sisterhood, truth, and courage touch her, she burns brighter than any insult could extinguish. The final image lingered on their silhouettes as they walked side by side through the vast glass doors of the corporate tower. The city lights shimmered beyond, a living backdrop to their quiet triumph. Derek was left behind, a figure shrinking into irrelevance, swallowed by the empty room he once commanded. But the sisters, they moved forward not as mirror images, but as reflections of resilience and power in different forms. Amara, sharpened by ambition, and Leela, strengthened by endurance. Two women, one flame, carrying with them the unspoken promise that no cruelty, no arrogance, no dismissal could ever smother their worth again. The narrator closed in a whisper that felt both intimate and eternal. Some stories end with crowns or victories shouted from rooftops, but this one ends with something quieter and perhaps far stronger. The sound of footsteps in unison, the sight of two women walking forward together, and the flame they carry lighting the path for all who have ever been told they were less.